Hello everyone, this is Space Café podcast, and I'm Marcus. I strive to maintain a timeless quality in my introductions so as to not to create any dissonance for those tuning in during different seasons. I'm quite particular about this and avoid causing any disturbance. Of course, starting a conversation in this manner could be seen as seeking an excuse to do the very thing I claim not to do. And you've caught me, of course. The recent Starship launch has occurred, has baffled me, has left me, sweating bullets, leaving behind a destructive aftermath of intense force, millions of pounds of thrust and scattered reinforced concrete debris all over the place. Someone mentioned that Elon Musk made reusable rockets a reality, and perhaps he should consider reusable launch pads as well. I see the impact of this quite literally. Humanity appears eager and determined to forge ahead, using our youthful energy to ascend regardless of the cost, and for good reason. The allure of space is undeniably captivating. While Starship will eventually transport us throughout the solar system, my two guests today have their professional gaze set on something, slightly more distant. When telescopes are prepared to divulge their digital treasure troves of binary encoded observations, my guests are called upon. These distinguished gentlemen from NASA's very own team of creatives are the ones who make the largely invisible realm of space visible to us.
How's this position? Is it okay, or do I move that?
May I?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I'll do that.
I'm going out on a limb now, but I'd venture to say that 99% of space is imperceptible to the human eye. However, of course, upon doing a little research, I discovered a sobering truth. A staggering 99.999997% of space is invisible to us, to the naked human eye. And even with advanced technology like the James Webb Space Telescope, our ability to observe remains limited. As our capacity to see further improves, so does the vastness of our observations. So how can we make sense of all of this? Before my mind is completely boggled, I'd like to introduce this episode's guest, two distinguished gentlemen who ensured that the destination we're headed towards have a welcoming face, at least.
All right. Here we go.
All right. How's that sounding?
That's
all right.
Works.
Yeah, we destroyed our voices last night too, but I'm trying to.
If you have some costs. Yeah, no problem.
Ladies and gentlemen, please give a very warm welcome to Michael Lentz, who currently serves as the art director for the Conceptual Image Lab at NASA and leads NASA Creatives, and Mark SubbaRao, the lead at NASA's Scientific Visualization Studio at NASA Goddard Space Flight Center. Let's begin.
Yeah, well, I can give you my perspective. Before working at NASA, I worked in the planetarium field for a couple of decades. And the thing about a planetarium, as opposed to, say, like a natural history museum, you can go see dinosaur bones, right?
Totally.
Oh, we can't put galaxies, in the planetarium, right?
Yeah.
Like, sometimes we have meteors, but all our stuff is like way too far away.
Yeah.
What we really have, like the artifact of space, of like deep space, is data. Mm-hmm. And so, making that data visible is, integral to like just being able to see it and understand it and appreciate it.
What's the difference between the two of you? Mark, you're the scientific guy. I'm not saying, Michael, that you're not scientific, but you're more on the creative side, right?
Yes, definitely. And that, I think, and not to say that data visualization does not have its own creativity in it, because in it of itself is a very beautiful art form. But yeah, on my side of the camp, it really focuses on the story that you're telling about the science that NASA is doing. And that's where, like Mark was saying, is that you can't physically, take people to these places. So through storytelling, we take them there. And I think that's where that creativity comes in is what is your audience? How do you want to tell this story? How do the scientists and engineers want to tell those stories? And that's where we work with them to do that.
I think to explicitly answer that division question. So between Michael's group, which is the Conceptual Image Lab, and my group was this Scientific Visualization Studio, which is like across the hall from each other. Like we have to decide, if there's a project, like who does what? Is this your project or is ours? And I think like what it comes down to is if there's like hard data, if there are numbers, then it tends to go to us. If it's, say you have a concept for a mission that doesn't exist now, you have to decide what that looks like, it tends to go to them.
So the fancy stuff that Carl Sagan did back in the 80s, like with all those fancy visions, that would have happened at your place.
Correct.
Right?
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
But we also, we collaborate a lot with each other too. And we've been doing a lot more of that, which has been really cool. So there's a lot of initiatives we come in on. We're building a new Earth Information Center that's going to focus on climate data. And we've been working with Mark's group on designing how that data would be displayed on the wall, and some of the short interstitial video pieces that will go on it as well too. That's been really cool. We've collaborated on the OSIRIS-REx missions. Most of the time, their data visuals and our art appear in the same video pieces. So it really is both of us working together to fully tell these stories.
Shall we take a look at a very concrete example, and that's happening maybe right now, that has happened, that you would like to point out? What could be a good example where both of you told a story that we all know now?
I think I would lean toward OSIRIS-REx probably.
Yeah, actually a lot of this happened before I started, so you should tell the story.
I think the OSIRIS-REx mission, which is bringing back its sample in September, was a big one we collaborated on. And one of the things they did, we had a live broadcast of the tag event where it was going to go down and actually get its sample. And one of the things that they wanted to do during that live broadcast is be able to show what is the spacecraft doing. And what we did was, using a real-time animation system, create a fully animated piece that was 78 minutes long that tracked exactly to what the spacecraft was doing at that time, so they could cut away to that and see it. So we created all the look of that. It was fairly photoreal, and we relied on Mark's team to provide us with ephemeris data to drive that animation. So we could time it to what was actually happening, and then when they cut away to it, it was accurately showing really what the spacecraft was doing at that time. And I think we were really only a few seconds off to exactly what it was doing.
Wow. Could you talk to OSIRIS-REx, to the mission itself?
Yeah, the mission itself, OSIRIS-REx, it went to an asteroid called Bennu a number of years ago. And its mission was to collect a sample from the surface of that asteroid and bring it back to Earth for analyzation. And again, it was more than successful. I think they were surprised at how much material they did stir up and collect. I think they had to even they were spinning the spacecraft to try to get rid of something.
Really? Yeah, they collected too much.
Yeah, they got to, because they were worried that the sample collector would even close properly because there was so much stuff in it. But they did get it closed. It's on its way back now. It's been going amazingly well. And it's due to re-enter the Earth's atmosphere in late September, I think. Yeah. I don't remember the exact date, but in September. And that's going to be really exciting. It'll come down in the Utah Salt Flats. Then we get to see what these parts of this asteroid look like and what they contain.
It's been a really rich product for visualization. It is actually, Bennu's the best mapped body in our solar system. 5 centimeter resolution. We have
5 centimeters. Where is it flying around?
Well, it's out in the asteroid belt.
Now it's somewhere in the asteroid belt. Okay. Wow, fascinating. So, do you?
Well, if I could, I just Michael mentioned 2 projects. So, the other project he mentioned is one we're currently working on, which is interesting in terms of the collaboration. So this is something called the Earth Information Center. It's what was initially like 18 months ago. Bill Nelson had a blog post where he announced that NASA was going to create a mission control for climate. And that concept's evolved a little bit, but it basically is this idea that we need this sort of like Apollo-style mission control to track the Earth and its systems and what's happening with climate change. And so the initial sort of public face of that's going to happen at NASA headquarters this June. And we're working on the big display that's going to essentially be this mission control with lots of visualizations and dashboards that flip through greenhouse gases and different things. But instead of just sort of slapping them all together in a grid of like, these are all the things, we really want to pay some attention to design. So we've created a whole suite of visualizations. Michael's group is looking at how we can arrange those, what's the visual language for switching between different modes of content in it. And I think like that's sort of like combination of like the sort of hardcore accurate data viz and the sort of, more artistic design elements, I think will make for a really great.
Yeah, and it's also incorporating a little bit of storytelling to it, because each bit of data that's getting displayed on there will have a short produced video that goes with it too, explaining a little more in depth about what that data is representing. So it's a really nice combination. It's an interesting physical installation as well too. There'll be a lot of audio experiences with that. So it's sort of like a little prototype with maybe one day expanding that to grander plans. So
I think there's a very important point when you mentioned, Mark, that NASA is also focusing on Earth. So NASA, maybe this is a cliche, NASA is not just out there. It's also down here. And we shouldn't forget about that. So, and this is maybe also a major part of future endeavors and missions for NASA, because right here on Earth, especially now in times of satellites, imaging technology, for our earthly things that are going on.
Yeah, indeed. So, that's actually like making that point is like the number one goal of this center we're building.
Yeah.
And you're right, like it surprises everyone, but where we work, the Goddard Space Flight Center has more working Earth scientists than any place in the world. More than 1,000. So,
wow.
NASA just isn't involved in it. NASA is like the major player in Earth science research.
But still, it seems like we do not have enough Earth scientists, because still we don't do anything about climate change. I'm maybe exaggerating a little, but we almost do nothing.
Yeah, and I think, does that get to the scientists not studying it enough, or does that then evolve into the political aspect?
No, I mean, like, to be super honest, I think the science is super clear.
Yeah,
we have all the answers.
Exactly.
We need to do something. Get
and
going.
I think that's just, sadly, that's just a very long-term educational process.
But I think, but there is more, and I think you're seeing, and part of this initiative is that. And maybe in the past you could have accused NASA as saying like, "Oh, here's the data. You guys go and do things with it." We know, which we do. It's part of our job, is to make this available to people who are using it. But there is more and more work in sort of applied sciences to make that connection between like, here's the data, but we'll help you use it, right? We go making it actionable, and so. Like in the past year, NASA's had this whole new initiative to reach out to the farming community. So we just went to the big agricultural conference, Commodity Classic, and had a big presence there. And, that's like, this is really what this whole center is all about. It's like, how are we putting this information in the hands of people who need it? So if it's city planners, how do we have a tool that tracks how sea level rise will be in the future, based on our predictions. NASA has the GISS, the Goddard Institute for Space Studies, which is like the premier climate modeling center in the world. So I think, in the past you could have said that NASA was very much like, we take the pictures, like here's the data, but we're trying to make those connections, because, you can say if we build it, they'll come, and some people do come. some people have always come, but we want to do more than that, really make those connections.
And I think that gets to the importance of the data visualizations. It takes what is very complicated for people to understand and lets them see it in a visual way. And I think making those visual connections to that data, exactly, it makes it a lot more understandable for just people in general. And I think that then helps drive that message more about, climate and how it's changing and affecting lives on Earth.
I think this is super critical to say, because sometimes people sometimes you hear that NASA has lost its way in the wake of SpaceX and new space. But I think this is just not the case. NASA has never been in the game of doing commercial stuff.
Right.
That's another's game to play. NASA is always about either the pushing the boundaries and the frontier, and now also the earth science.
Yeah. And I think that to that point too, I think, obviously NASA still consults and helps a lot with all the commercial industries, but it also takes some pressure off of NASA now. They don't have to focus on that. It gives them the ability to focus on other things. And as you said, to push those boundaries even further. I think it's amazing to see what the commercial industry has been doing with space and how well that's been going. So, you don't need to be involved with that as much anymore.
Because it was prepared decades ago by NASA.
Yep.
And now let the others take over. It's not NASA's job anymore.
Exactly.
I was really struck. We had a town hall recently, and Pam Melroy said that she often gets this question from her in-laws. Well, it's like, why don't you just let SpaceX and Jeff Bezos and all these people do that? And her answer was, the difference is that NASA works for the benefit of the American people, right? And so there's this fundamental difference in what our goals are. And, when things get to a point where, it's a commercial activity and it's mainstream, it's fine. We're pushing boundaries and we're doing the work that there isn't a profit motive for, right? And so, we mentioned the climate work and the earth science stuff. This is vitally important to our planet and, every citizen, but it's not something that there's a profit in. In some cases there is, and we stay out of it, right? So there are great companies taking high resolution satellite data, higher resolution than our satellites, and we use that in our research, and it's fine. But there's certain things that they just won't do. The sort of more scientific sensors that they're probably just not going to do because people will pay for the pictures, but they won't necessarily pay for all that. I think that's exactly it. It's what will we do that, there's a motive. We have different motives.
So where's NASA's main goal right now? Also, maybe this is also maybe up for interpretation. What is really important right now? Is it earth science or is it astrophysics? Is it out there? Because I feel like what I'm trying to get at is that we have major issues down here on Earth. And we have people saying, why do we need all this research up there whilst we have huge problems to tackle and grapple with on Earth? There may be something to it, but these critics, these people maybe do not take into account is that we need a common goal, wherever that is. If it's up there, so be it, but it's a common goal for something, for new kinds of technological evolution. So it doesn't really matter where that goal is. But anyways, maybe down here on Earth, we have something to come to terms with. And the question to you may be you're maybe taking different sides here, but what do you think is NASA's role these days?
Well, yeah, in some ways, I think you answered your own question really well, Marcus, about what's the value in cutting edge exploration, but I just to emphasize the point I made before is one answer to that question is why doesn't NASA work on the problems everybody's having here on Earth? Is that we are we're deeply engaged in solving the most serious problems that people have, and And, honestly, I think like climate change is the most serious problem the world faces, right? Now that we've sort of like, we're on the downslope of COVID, hopefully. But, climate change is not going to be a 1 or 2 year problem. Yeah. It's not even going to be a generational problem. It's going to be a multi-generation problem. And we're battling that. We're battling that, we're talking to the farmers about what they need to do. We're talking to the cities about how they need to plan. All that's happening. But, I think the other point you made, and I spent all of my career working in cosmology, like the most far out stuff there, the first stuff that's most farthest removed from humanity. I think there was real value in that, in giving people perspective and understanding. But it was also true at a certain point in my career, I'm like, oh, I have this opportunity where maybe I can lead this group. And our group, actually, the majority of the work we do is in neuroscience. Probably like 60% of the work we do is in neuroscience. And it was nice to do something that was a little bit more concrete. It's like, oh, maybe we can have an impact. And, all that's in NASA research. And then on the communication side, I think what we can do by utilizing the skills of our groups and others at NASA is conquer the real issue. And like the way we need to solve this problem is get people engaged with it, right? And get them paying attention to it and them talking about it. Even when they're arguing about it and saying ridiculous things on the internet, which they do every time one of my visualizations is posted, I read the comments and it drives me crazy. But at least it's in the consciousness.
Yeah, and I would agree with that as well too. But I think the other thing that it does, when you mention, why do deep space exploration when there's so many problems, there is something incredibly unifying as a planet. And I think Webb has been a perfect example of that. When you see everyone just in awe of the beauty of these images coming in, and that's just a visceral human reaction that we all have when we see that. And I think when you can create something that is also doing science and studying what our universe is, and then also impart the beauty of what the universe is, really touches people. And I think that's a very important thing that I think can get lost as well too. There's this part of it that just excites people. It gets people. It was amazing when the Webb first images came out. It enveloped the world. It was on every website. It literally was everywhere.
Go back to that moment. How did it feel to you personally? Because I hear
stressful was probably
it's going to be very different for me.
Yeah. So Michael was in charge of building the set where like the first images were announced and whatnot. So yeah, it was a little high pressure.
It was a little high pressure because there was a lot of coordination to time the image going out. We had them on huge displays in Times Square, Piccadilly. Coldplay was showing it at their concert. We had to make sure everybody got those out. But the thing that I think struck me when it really hit me after all this frenzy went down was at the end of the day when the set had closed down, everyone had left, but the first images were still up on this giant monitor wall on the set. And there was no one else around. I was just standing there looking at it, and it was quiet, and I just felt numb. I was just like, I couldn't stop looking at it. And it's
very emotional.
It was really emotional. And I was just surprised at how much that kind of hit me in that moment.
It's a moment of awe.
It really was. It really was. And just the wonder of it. And then that sort of hit of the realization of what we had just done. And now the whole world is seeing this incredible thing that I was staring at there. And that really struck me. And I think that hit a lot of people. And even when I saw the scientists looking at it, it was really funny. We were all were the one that had the gravitational lensing of all the deep field. And we saw the gravitational lensing, like, oh my God, look at all that lensing. And all the crew, and this was after the broadcast, and the scientists were up there, and we're like 2 inches from the monitor, like looking at it, but look at that one behind the lensing. That means it's magnifying it even more than the telescope did. And everyone was getting excited about it. And I think those moments are just very human. And I think it kind of speaks to everybody. And that I think is something amazing that NASA does. That it just touches people that way when those missions come together and you truly see it expanding our knowledge and view of the universe.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there have been a few of these images, right? You think of like Earthrise and some of this, and that cosmic cliffs image will be that generational image that's, I think I remember hearing like this like major events of the last year, and there were 10 of them, and all of them were bad, except for two things, right? It was James Webb, and it was the DART mission. And you're like, wow, this stuff really impacts people. Here at South by, there are all these like celebrities and amazing things happening, but the crowd for the JWST panel yesterday, I think it blew everything else away. I mean, they were turning hundreds and hundreds of people away because they couldn't fit in the biggest ballroom. And
why do you think that is?
Well,
of course, you did a great job.
We've been talking about it, and like, first of all, just really happy to see that, right? I mean, it was really cool. It's just really rewarding to see that those things that you think, I think we feel should be what resonates with people. It should matter more than sort of celebrity culture. Maybe at some level are starting to. And I think it's pretty great. So, it's not surprising me to it's two. That is, it's what surprised me is why hasn't it always been this way? But it's glad to see it starting to happen.
And I think too, it touches back on that need to see that awe-inspiring imagery and to hear about the people behind that did this. And I think that's what draws so many people into that. I mean, it was amazing when they showed the image at the talk. Everyone was just applauding, and this is over a space image, and that's something it was packed. There were hundreds of people clapping with this image, and we're months out from when the first images came out, and it's still drawing these people in to understand.
Talking about the cosmic cliffs.
Well,
which one?
Because
if people want to look at it now.
Yes. Yesterday there was a release of a Wolf-Rayet star. So it's a high mass star that's puffing off its outer layer, so it's surrounded in this sort of beautiful dust cloud. So it's a quite attractive image.
We do not see it right now, but before your mind's eye, of course you have it. Can you describe it, what you see?
Yeah, so let's imagine, we got a field of stars, but the center is a very bright point with this sort of like classic, as you've now seen from all these images, diffraction spikes we see in stars in the JWST images. And then in sort of like a pinkish color is this sort of spherical shells, all coming together in a kind of nice sort of spherical pattern surrounding the star. And these are the outer layers of the star being puffed off, and what it represents is, and I think what's described really well in this panel is like this sort of deep connection between. Before I dissed cosmology, saying like it's very far removed from human existence, but in some profound way, it's deeply tied to us because it's the Carl Sagan stuff. The iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, they were forged in the heart of stars. And this is a star doing it. It's making those elements. And they have to get out, right? So they get out when they're thrown off, and then those clouds will eventually form another generation of stars that will have the stuff that can make planets, creatures like us. So we were not just in one star, like we're star stuff. We're actually probably in two stars in cosmic history, our elements, most of them.
It may be a strange analogy, but sometimes I feel like we humans, we need an omega point, a North Star, because we've lost so many of those North Stars in our very recent history. We lost our idols, we lost our political leaders because they're just not making sense anymore in many places. We lost in many places religion. the only thing we have is consumerism in the Western world. But maybe that's not the North Star to have. So perhaps these images are something that resonate with us on a deeper level. Maybe. So I don't know if this makes any sense, but I think that we have a human yearning towards orientation. Or maybe at the moment, a deep lack of orientation. This is why we're drifting around in the cosmos, in very individually. This is one of the reasons why such images resonate.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly seems to be true that in a world where like everything seems to divide us, right? Yeah. And in a country where everybody falls in two camps about everything, then that doesn't happen with space. Like it's not a political issue, right? There's no divide
and no center.
It's not a center and wings, right? Yeah. It's like it's a point we can come around, right? Yeah. There's not two sides.
Yeah.
And that's pretty unique, and just to pull back and to think like there's some really big things, bigger than all the things we argue about, but big things that we can agree on. And so when we see those images, it's not just their aesthetic beauty, which, and kudos to the team that, put that together, because there are lots of telescopes taking amazing images all over the planet. It's not just Hubble and James Webb, but why are those images that we connect with? Well, a lot of it's that team at the Space Telescope Science Institute and those that work on that. But it's what that image is. It's the amazingness of our universe. But it's also the triumph of humanity and the incredible engineering that went into this incredible machine. And the struggle, right? The struggle.
I mean, absolutely, the struggle is a good part of good storytelling. But I feel that James Webb is a miracle. This is not a piece of machinery that is nicely engineered. It's a miracle. And in my opinion, also, so many things had to go right to make this thing happen. The odds speak completely against what is going on right now, that it is functioning so perfectly.
I just have a quick, I'm an astronomer, not a engineer.
Yeah, sure.
And just of course, James Webb has been around as a concept for so long, and just, when astronomers would see the videos of how this was supposed to unfold, we just all go back at the coffee breaks of these conferences and be like, that's never going to work, right? There's no way. You see, the shield is going to tag on itself. Something's going to get caught. It'll get stuck.
And if something gets stuck, the rest won't happen.
Exactly. It was just such an elaborate animation. It seemed like, I can make this happen with an animation.
Right. Yeah.
But how can we have it and it worked flawlessly? So kudos.
And I think too, an interesting thing, getting back to your earlier point too, with these images and how they affect people is, I think, another thing that is very visceral about humans, I think, is that need to discover. I think that's very unique to us as a species. And when you see these kind of images, you do initially get awestruck by their beauty. But then I think you're then naturally drawn to why. Why am I attracted to this? What is this doing? And I think for some people that will spark the need for more discovery. It's not just as Mark, you were saying, it's not just a pretty picture, but if that pretty picture lures you in and inspires you, you can learn more from it. And I think that's the important thing is that it can do is through its beauty, inspire the need to learn more and become more knowledgeable about what it is you're looking at. I think that's a really important thing to think about when you see those gorgeous images is, why am I drawn to this? Why does this inspire me, and why do I want to look at it?
Do you have an answer to why we feel this is beautiful? But I guess there is no ugly galaxy out there.
Well, I think it's a lot like looking when you see a beautiful sunset. When you see the sunset in a certain way, why do you just stop and pause and look at that? I think it's the same kind of notion. When you see any natural phenomenon, if you're hiking and you come across an amazing waterfall, it's the kind of thing you stop, you look at it, you take a moment to absorb just the beauty of nature. And I think that's the thing too. Space is nature. It's part of everything that's around us. And I think it has that same feeling as when you just, see anything that's beautiful in nature and you just stop for a moment, and the classic stop and smell the roses kind of thing,
The cosmic cliffs in particular, which I think is like the one that really resonated. There is something like about its composition that's very landscape-like, right? It's like
because it sort of represents what we have on Earth, so we have something to identify with.
Yeah, especially if it's just sort of oriented in the right way, and so I think that might be part of it. It's in our when we were talking yesterday during our panel about this question, and when I was explaining that my job, and so on the data visualization side where I'm relying more on the data, in many ways I was cheating, right? I'm cheating to do art because the universe is already beautiful, so I don't have to make it beautiful. I just have to put things in their places and arrange them in the right way, and that will come out because it's there already. And so, in that sense, Michael has the harder job because he has to make art. I can just use the universe's art and take credit for it. And that's that was often what I did. It's I got into data visualization because I was working on a map of galaxies, a slow digital sky survey, and first you just plot them. And you're like, oh, this is beautiful. This is like an incredibly beautiful pattern. I can fly through this, and I can spend hours just flying through the universe. And it's no magic. It's no artistic magic. That was the universe that made that.
Wow. What is it like? Or how does your work start? So at some point you get an email. There's a new patch of data coming in. How does that work?
He gets the data.
Yeah. So you first.
Yeah. And it's funny. So it's often getting because how do you do a project? And I'm like, well, I'm still figuring it out. I've only been this for 2.5 years now, but often it is exactly that. There'll be an email. There'll be an email that'll be like, oh, we have this paper coming out. We think it's an interesting result. And then there's a team of communicators, like video producers, science writers. They'll get together and we'll be like, does this seem like a good story for us to put out? And we sort of, evaluate that based on a number of things, like is it an easy story to tell? Is it very newsworthy? Is it how important is the result? And then, we pull the trigger and usually the visualization is pretty central to that. So what we'll do is we'll sit down, we'll assign, we have this great staff, 18 people, I think it's the largest group of people in the world doing this kind of work. Many of them have been doing it for decades, and we'll sit down with the scientist and discuss, what are they trying to convey? What's the nature of the data? What are the data formats? A lot of times there's these technical issues, like how do we get, and then we just start playing around with stuff. We tend to, our processes, we tend to we'll like to start with the data they have. So they don't have to do any work. We'll use, we'll translate that sort of we'll use our scientific tools to translate that. And then we kind of pull it into more Hollywood tools. So we kind of to have a foot in each camp of,
Do you write your own engines, or would you use the Unreal Engine?
Yeah, we are actually using Unreal Engine for a lot of our work these days. The OSIRIS-REx tag event animation that I mentioned was done in Unreal Engine because there would be no way we were going to be able to render out 78 minutes of animation. We do have a small render farm in-house, but even that would have taken more time to render that amount of frames. So we did leverage Unreal Engine for that, and it wrote all those frames out for the 78 minutes of animation over our artist's lunch hour. So it was really great, and it provided a lot more flexibility for us in how we work. We're working on a new Mars sample return animation with JPL, and we're doing that in Unreal Engine as well. So we are leveraging those technologies a lot more. And for the most part, at least in our group, we do use a lot more off-the-shelf software packages for doing our content creation.
Yeah, what we do as well. And I would say we have a moderate sized render farm. We're actually very fortunate in that the NCCS, the National Center for Climate Simulations, is like right next to us, so they have this great supercomputer, but you always need to be up to date. So when they run their machine for 3 years, they're getting new machines. And when they get new machines, like 3-year-old machines are still pretty good. So we pull them and we use them to do our work. So it's a great asset that we have.
So yes, our render farms are made from recycled supercomputers.
Yeah, so
our stuff.
3-year-old supercomputer is still pretty good.
It is.
Do you have more intel regarding the following story? I heard that at some point NASA got a call by whoever that they had a telescope to give away. It's called Telescope 1. And NASA said, yeah, bring it on. And it was from an intelligence agency because they didn't use it anymore because they had better telescopes and NASA used it for whatever. I don't know if that story is true. Speaking of recycling,
it was maybe 2014. But I'm not qualified to tell this story. So but it is essentially the story of the Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope was being built now. And the problem is I don't know enough of the details about that. That it was like an extra DoD.
Yeah.
And I remember the sort of call the community. What I don't know is maybe that's how this project started, and for we're not even using that anymore.
Yeah, because my understanding was Nancy Grace Roman was that telescope.
Yeah, so that's the story. I just don't feel like I can tell it well enough.
Which is, and I think the great thing is being able to reuse that kind of stuff.
Absolutely,
because
sustainability.
Yeah, exactly.
Speaking of secret knowledge, do you know anything the rest of the world doesn't know? And you're not allowed to talk about it.
Well, yeah. So,
of course,
NASA is not or at least none of us have any clearance. We have no classified information. Not only that, we're so open, and so this idea that NASA can keep a secret, we're so untrained to do that.
It is, because it's part of the charter is for us to disseminate information as far and wide as possible. So by our own nature, we are supposed to tell everybody what we're discovering. And I think that was really cool with a lot of what the scientists were doing with data that they were collecting from Webb, is that they have the option to hold on to that for a year to analyze themselves. But a lot of them are making that decision. No, let's just release it to everybody now. And I think then you have more of that collaborative thing where everybody gets to look at this and they may find something that the scientists were not finding.
We actually were making this point out here at South by Southwest, in that we, both of our groups put out all this content, for all these communication products, and also just for missions to understand how missions are going to work. But we make that all publicly available. But we not just do that, we package things in a way that we give all the pieces of it. It's kind of meant for other content creators. So part of the reason we had a panel was hey guys, come and use our stuff and make things with it. And so we just, I think part of the reason why NASA has such a strong brand, the reason why people wear NASA T-shirts wherever you go in the world. I've been I've been in Europe. Nobody's got a European Space Agency shirt. I see kids.
That's what I was going to say. And this really, really annoys me as a European. And seriously,
I can see it. Right?
You go to H&M. And you get a NASA T-shirt in Europe.
Yes.
Why? We have our own agency.
You do.
It's amazing.
And it's a great agency.
It doesn't even just happen in bigger areas. I was up in Scotland, in Inverness, and out in the Highlands of Scotland, you find gift shops that have NASA T-shirts and things.
And and
it's
also,
amazing.
And our sort of equivalent groups, ESA has great people doing the similar work that we do. It's just that NASA has for so long done this and done in a way that has been just, the free use of their images and the rights on that means that those images get out there, right? They're in every textbook and whatnot. It's just because it's places people can go for that material. And I think that side of it, the kind of communications and the sharing, has just been really successful for us as an agency.
And I think you touched on a point there too. It's the longevity of NASA. It's how long it's been around. And I think it's really ingrained. I mean, everything that had been done through its history has been awe-inspiring.
I mean, it kicked it off with the moon landing.
Exactly. Well, even Mercury and then the moon landings and now going back to the moon, all of those things start to ingrain itself in the culture of
the world.
The world, exactly. Yes. And you start then seeing it in stories, seeing it in films, and it gets more and more ingrained in there. And I think that then inspiration is like, oh, it's NASA. And that, again, is an amazing way for then people to start, why do you like NASA? What is it that is so ubiquitous about seeing those everywhere? And I think that then, whether you realize it or not, it's touching something in there that's getting you interested in essence, what is science? So I think that's really neat. I love seeing it.
Rightly so. Absolutely.
Heck, first thing I did when I got the job with NASA was I went online. I just bought all the swag I could, right? So at some point it's ridiculous because all right, Mark, you're wearing a NASA shirt and a NASA jacket and a NASA hat. We get it.
Well, and it was
you work for NASA.
For me though, I mean, even as a kid, because again, NASA had been around so long, I grew up knowing about NASA, and my parents took me to the Air and Space Museum in DC when I was a kid, and I saw all the things that was built and went into space, and that as a kid really triggered me and got me interested. And as I was explaining the other day too, because I grew up in DC and because of the way the Smithsonian's laid out, literally the way I got into art and science was because I was a kid. My parents would take us to these museums, and the Hirshhorn Museum, which has beautiful, gorgeous modern art in it that I just loved when I was a kid, is literally across the street from the Air and Space Museum. And that juxtaposition of being able to walk from seeing incredible modern art and then walk literally right across the street into another building and see all these spacecraft and planes and rockets was really affected inspiring. How I got drawn into all of this. So that's why I think it's another thing is just people exposing themselves to those kind of things that you might not normally do. Because I think the more you can expose yourself to, the more you can make connections with things. And I think that's really important. And I'm very grateful that, my parents exposed me to those kind of things when I was a kid.
Now let's open our focus as wide as we can. Where are we headed towards as a spacefaring species? Because a lot is going on in the industry at the moment. Still, I think we're scratching the surface, as we know. But what do you think? You both are artists. You have that creative mindset that should help answer this question that may not have an answer, but just an interpretation and a very personal take. Where do you think we're headed?
I think for me personally, as you said, it's exciting to be living now, seeing us just starting to scratch that surface. I think with the commercialization, there's going to be a lot of potential there. And I think some of it too just comes from the nature of us as a species. We're a lot of people in essence, what is a very small place in the universe. And if you don't expand beyond that, you will run out of resources. You need to get them from somewhere else. Well, there's space. I think the scary thing about that for me, though, is then we're taking everything else that evolves around that into space with us. My hope would be not to see that happen. Frankly, again, personally, I don't think there's going to be a way around that. But I think the expansion of knowledge that comes with that, the deeper understanding of the universe and how we can live in it, because humans are not designed to live out there. And I think that's going to be really amazing to see how are we going to evolve as a spacefaring species? That's what we're becoming. I mean, we have now sent space probes outside our solar system. We are exploring all the planets in our solar system. We're finding planets in other solar systems. And this is on our path to become a spacefaring species. And, it's that kind of thing. How are we going to adapt to that? And I think that's the fascinating thing for me to think about.
And will we survive that moment?
Exactly.
Down here.
Exactly. That's
It's a filter.
It is, yeah.
It is a filter. And so I mean, that future, of course, it all depends on timescales, right? I mean, humanity is truly like a multiplanetary species. That's, I think, in any significant way. I mean, we'll have people on other planets in decades, but for it to be a significant factor, this is a long, long way off.
Yep.
And so there is, in a lot of this discussion that happens around this, any of this narrative about how we have to leave the Earth to save the Earth is like completely misplaced. The amount of energy and innovation and that just needs to go into becoming multiplanetary is so much greater than the relatively easy work to solve our problems. So like, like this isn't our solution for the future. I mean, maybe, give or take.
Running away has never been a solution.
Yeah, exactly. All right, in 1 billion years, the sun's going to warm up enough that we probably need to go to Mars, right? Like,
you probably need at some point.
But a billion's a long time. We'll get there. But I think that the more interesting one, and it's funny, like I've been talking about this with my wife, who's always wanted to be an astronaut and has applied many times, and was a finalist on the sort of ill-fated Mars One boondoggle. But it was a fun little fantasy for us anyway. She like, do you want to come on that? I'm like, no. Like,
so Mars you didn't apply.
I didn't apply. She was a finalist. I was like, Mars, ain't the kind of place to raise your kids, and I mean, it's lonely out in space.
She was a finalist.
She was.
Wow.
She wasn't like but
but you knew that she wouldn't come back.
Yes.
So because to
be fair, we also knew these guys were never going to. It was a bit of a fantasy, but yeah.
Because I met one of the finalists also in Europe, and his wife was next to him when I was interviewing him, and then she was like, from a very natural moment, she was like, "Why don't we get divorced right now?"
Wow.
And because she was saying, if you go, I will never see you again. So why not get divorced right now? And I think this is a valuable question, a very painful question, but it's, anyways, I'm going.
Yeah, and the answer is for the insurance. Sorry, but I think no. I mean, that is a serious thing. At least in our house, I don't think, even though she was in the final 600 or something, I don't think either of us really believed that these people had what it took to actually pull off the mission. It was more just a way of sort of keeping that dream, that childhood dream, alive a little bit.
And anyways, it was a media thing anyways, in the first place.
Yeah. And
it was not about the science, maybe it was about the popularity.
And you started to realize when you went through the process, the sort of things they were asking, like that they didn't really have their act together.
Yeah. For your future journey into space, to the stars, provided you want to be a part of a mission, and it's going to be a very lonely, boring mission, of course. We set up a playlist on Spotify, and each guest is asked to contribute one of their favorite tunes to that playlist. Which one will it be? Mark, Michael.
It's funny. I'm just thinking, like, again, like mentioning my wife, but we have this, like, we call it Space Trip podcast on Spotify, which we listen to all the time, which are like space themes things. So I'm gonna pick one. There's a tune. Oh, but I might get the band name wrong. It's "Go" by Public Radio Broadcast, something like this. Mm-hmm. And anyway, it has like the Apollo 11 Anyway, it's a great thing, like when you're on a mission. Or if we want to go deeper, I was a big Sun Ra fan, so I might do Strange Celestial Road by Sun Ra.
Good. So be it. Michael. People, by the way, took Black Sabbath, Jimi Hendrix, Foo Fighters. So you do not need to focus on celestial tunes only.
Well, with that being said, it kind of is, and it probably will not be what you expect. But as an artist personally, music has always been a big influence on me, particularly David Bowie. And one of his albums that I think was a little bit more underrated that I've always enjoyed was Outside. So I would have to go with Hello Space Boy.
Wonderful. And
not just Hello Space Boy, but the Hello Space Boy Pet Shop Boys version. that would be the one.
Good.
It's a little more chill than his version, but they're both excellent. But
we have to add this to our playlist.
Yes.
Cool. Last question. This show is called Space Café podcast, coffee place. In coffee places, you now and then have an espresso if you're tired to energize yourself. Now, why don't you share an espresso for the mind with me, with the audience, to energize, to get energized and inspired? Who wants to start? Michael?
I think I would go with kind of what I was touching on earlier is as you move through this world, is try to expose yourself to new things all the time and incorporate that into your life, learn from it, make connections with things that are around you and learn to understand them. And I think that helps everybody move forward, I think, in a way. And I think that's very important. It's something I try to do all the time. That's what's been wonderful being here as well. It's just connecting and meeting other people and learning about things that may have nothing to do with what you do or your interests. But at some point, you're like, wait, I remember when I talked to this person years ago, and a moment comes along and you make another connection. And I think that's a big thing I always find.
My deep conviction is that everybody has a story to tell because we're all individuals. So there's no boring person out there. So no matter who you meet on the street or at the counter or in the elevator, it can only be interesting if you're true.
And I've always thought about, I kind of wanted to do this almost as an art project where you just, and I don't know if it's, how people would take it, but I always thought it'd be fascinating just to walk up to random people and say, could you just tell me a story? It doesn't have to be true.
Sure.
It could be about yourself or anything. Yeah, it would just be really neat because, as you said, everybody has a story, and I think that's again one of a very visceral part of being human. It's how we learn by telling stories to each other. It's what we're doing here. We're taking knowledge and telling stories about it, so people learn. That's what storytelling does. That's how we've evolved as a species: is telling stories to others. How do you hunt? How do you gather? Those are stories that were imparted to carry knowledge forward. And I think
it's the only way to carry knowledge.
Yeah, and it's a wonderful thing that we do as a species. Yeah. And I think that's why I love, with what we do as content creators within NASA is helping tell these stories and sharing this knowledge. Yeah. And it's a great privilege to be in that spot and be able to do that. And just fantastic people to work with.
Mark?
Yeah,
espresso.
Well, let's maybe we'll go back to some of this perspective stuff we're talking about. So these stories are never going to run out. Like if you just think about the sort of grandeur of the universe, and it's bigger than people think, right? So, there are hundreds of billions of stars in our galaxy. There are hundreds of billions of galaxies in the observable universe, right? Hundreds of billions times hundreds of billions. But what we now know is like the observable universe. That's just what we can see. There's stuff way beyond that. Like all the stuff we can ever even just see is just a fraction of what's out there. So like it's a big place with a lot of stories. An interesting thing is like we're actually lucky in a lot of ways because of dark energy, because like things are starting to go away from us faster and faster. We'll start seeing less and less of the universe over time. So it's
disappearing. So we
better do it now. Like
build those telescopes.
Build those telescopes. invest now, because in 50 billion years, you won't be able to see anything. So.
Wonderful, Mark. Michael, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having us. This has been fun.
Yeah. Thank you, Marcus.
That's it for this episode of the Space Café podcast, my friends. We hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we did, and that you're taking away some intriguing insights and thought-provoking ideas. And of course, we'd like to extend our gratitude to our guests, Michael Lentz and Mark SubbaRao, for their inspiring contributions and for taking the time to join us in the first place. Don't forget to subscribe to the Space Café podcast to ensure you do not miss any future episodes. You can also follow us on social media to stay updated and be informed about new episodes. And if you enjoyed this episode, we would greatly appreciate a rating or review on your preferred podcast platform. This helps us reach a wider audience and present even more exciting topics and guests to you. If you have any questions, suggestions, or comments, please do not hesitate to reach out to us. We always welcome feedback from our listeners. Thank you once again for tuning in, and we hope to welcome you back for the next episode of the Space Café podcast. Until then, take care and stay curious. Bye-bye.